Shabbat Shalom. Last week, we concluded the weekly Torah portion with a thought-provoking question. What happened to Pharaoh's freedom of choice? We talked about how each person has the power and the ability to choose whether or not to follow God's path. Free will is a gift from God. We've backed this up with several verses, such as, I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live. God says choose life, which means that God placed the option in our hands. We believe that sin, with all that this implies, is our choice. Yes, God gave us the possibility to sin, but we emphasized the fact that He also gave us the opportunity to choose what is right, what is holy. The theological challenge stands out immediately at the beginning of our parasha, when the Lord said to Moses, "Go to Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his officials, so that I may perform these signs of mine among them." Let's focus on Pharaoh. How did God harden his heart without harming his right to free will? God is all-capable, and human beings clearly are not. However, when a person thinks he is limitless and free of accountability, it usually involves hurting others. History has known many such great and powerful leaders who have hurt and destroyed millions of people. In Egypt, Pharaoh was like a god. The pharaohs were part of the pantheon of Egypt. He was all-capable. No one could criticize him. No one could tell him what to do. Pharaoh was revered as a god, and as such, he was full of self-importance. It was his pride that eventually led to his downfall, and all of Egypt with him. It was inconceivable that Moses would come, declare that he was a priest of God, and demand that the nation of slaves be released. In fact, Moses, acting on God's order, did not ask Pharaoh to release his people outright. Instead, he was instructed to say that God happened to be revealed to him, and that he asked the Israelites to go to the desert for 3 days in order to worship God. The intention was for this request to seem fishy, like it was a trick. Pharaoh sensed that Moses wanted to free the people of Israel. He also felt that Moses was lying to him by insisting that the trip will only be 3 days in the desert. At first, Pharaoh did not even listen to Moses because God allowed the magicians of Egypt to perform the same miracles as him. In other words, Pharaoh simply viewed Moses as a very talented illusionist. When Pharaoh finally started listening, he tried to enter into negotiations with Moses regarding the terms of the deal. If they claim that they are going to worship God, then who is allowed to go? When will the trip take place? And for how long? What will remain is a guarantee of their return. Pharaoh was testing out the situation. Pharaoh's first proposal was for Moses to remain in Egypt and simply take leave in order so they can worship God. However, Moses rejected this offer. Pharaoh's second proposal came when the threat of locusts loomed over him, when he was under heavy pressure from his advisors, whose spirit was broken by the plagues that Egypt had suffered until then. Then Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh. "Go worship the Lord your God," he said, "but tell me who will be going." Pharaoh continued the negotiation. His previous proposal was rejected, and he must make concessions with Moses. So he asked, "If I let you go, who will be going?" Moses answered, "We will go with our young and old, with our sons and daughters, with our flocks and herds, because we are to celebrate a festival to the Lord." Before Moses and Aaron were driven out of Pharaoh's presence, Pharaoh answered, "No, have only the men go and worship the Lord, since that's what you've been asking for." Pharaoh was trying to play a psychological game with Moses. Moses demanded that all the people, including their belongings, go and worship God. Pharaoh sensed that this was a trick and suggested that only the men go and worship the Lord. Pharaoh was hoping that Moses would give in and agree to some kind of a deal. Pharaoh's offer was relatively fair. He was willing to send all the men to go and worship the Lord. However, even this offer, Moses could not accept. After the plague of darkness, the desperate Pharaoh called Moses and laid before him his last offer. "Go, worship the Lord. Even your women and children may go with you. Only leave your flock and herds behind." Pharaoh was basically saying that if it was some sort of a holiday, then take the whole family, and the children too. But leave most of your livestock behind as a deposit to guarantee your return. Moses answered Pharaoh with complete confidence. "Our livestock too must go with us. Not a hoof is to be left behind. We have to use some of them in the worshiping the Lord our God." Moses could have continued negotiating how much livestock to leave behind, how much to take to worship God, what percentage, all the small details. Indeed, Pharaoh was already agreeing to send all the people of Israel. Instead of focusing on the little details, Moses said the following, "And until we get there, we will not know what we are to use to worship the Lord." Moses was saying to Pharaoh, "I cannot leave anything here because I do not know what God wants. So I'm taking everything just to be on the safe side." Moses was speaking with honesty and sincerity, but to Pharaoh's ears, his words sounded like the most blunt lie he uttered so far. How did Moses not know? What kind of high priest doesn't know how to worship his God? Pharaoh was now convinced that Moses' intentions were crooked, that he did not intend to worship his God. His plan was to run away with the people of Israel. Let's try to look at things from Pharaoh's point of view. He has given up everything. He was willing to let the people go. The fact that Moses was not willing to leave a guarantee that he, as a priest, did not even know how to worship his God clearly showed that the people of Israel had no intention in worshiping their God. They were merely planning their escape. These points are what hardened Pharaoh's heart. My argument is that Pharaoh had complete free will. When God hardened Pharaoh's heart, he did not do this in a supernatural way. Rather, he used Moses as well as a few psychological tricks to accomplish this. He caused Pharaoh to become suspicious. Pharaoh's problem was that he saw himself as a god. He was the supreme ruler. He was not used to losing a negotiation. It was beneath his dignity, beneath his stature. Here we can refer to the familiar verse, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall." When we try to be like Superman, strong and independent, we usually fail. The desire to be independent is with us from birth, And it's a healthy desire, as long as it does not become an obsession and we're able to maintain balance in life. It's good to be self-sufficient, but it's crucial to remember that we have parents, family, friends, and a community. We are not alone. We live in a two-way street of give and take. If we build others up, then they will build you up. If we invest in others, then they will invest in you. Pharaoh learned only how to take. He did not know how to give, and especially how to give up. And that is what pushed the Egyptian army into the Red Sea at the end. Before we finish, I want to add a final thought about this week's portion from a slightly different direction. Before Moses was known as our Rabbi Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, he had a stuttering problem. And he was tasked with the job of encouraging a nation of slaves to lift their heads and prepare to go free. In addition, he had to stand before the strongest and cruelest king in the world and negotiate the freedom for his people. Moses had a stutter. But despite this, God used him to stand before Pharaoh, the supreme ruler, and lead the people of Israel to freedom. God used him to speak to the entire nation of Israel, as well as to teach the Torah to them for 40 years in the desert. God can use all of us as well. We also may stutter in many aspects of our lives, but each one of us is called to be a leader. Each one of us is called to be a teacher in his or her surroundings, in our family, and in our workplace. God looks at what is inside of us, what cannot be faked, at our renewed lives in Yeshua, who transforms us into the light of the world. It's best not to give in to our stuttering, but rather to let the light of Yeshua shine from inside of us. To let the light of Yeshua shine from our lives and from our families. Shabbat Shalom.